Okay, so then in that case, welcome everybody. This is session 5, rescheduled from week 2 of our procurement series. We're going to talk about contract types today. We've got Jennifer Tilden here from the SBA district office, and she'll be giving us a tour of federal contract types. We got a late start, so I'm not going to delay us anymore. I'm going to pass things over to Jen to get started, and we'll be sure to send out the deck and Jennifer's contact information so that if you do want to follow up with her afterwards, you'll be able to do so. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for bearing with us during our technical details or difficulties. My name is Jen Tilden. I am the head of basically government contracting for Eastern Pennsylvania and the state of Delaware. What that basically means is if you are interested in becoming involved in any of our set-aside programs, woman-owned small business, Hub Zone, 8A, small disadvantaged business, or veteran-owned business, you're probably eventually going to come through me. So I've placed my information in the chat. Anyone's welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or LinkedIn chat. In addition, my contact information and the contact information of my second are all on the last slide in the slide deck, so you can reach out at any time. Please be aware, all of my services and all the services of everyone in my office are provided to you free of charge. They're paid by taxpayer dollars. So please don't think that you have to budget to talk to me or my staff. We are here for you for free. Can you see that slide, please, Isabel?
I sure can.
Okay. I have nightmares of someday myself talking for like 10 minutes and realizing no one saw what I was saying. Today, we're going to be talking about government contract types. And that's really, from the point of view of most vendors, that's really broken down into 2 types of information they're most interested in. First of all, what types of contracts are out there and what determines what type is used. And second of all, what are the payment types? People are obviously very interested in the possibilities of getting paid and how they can change the possibilities of getting paid. So we're going to be going over those 2 basic ideas today. If you have any additional information, there's loads of information out on my LinkedIn, or as I said, because we're running a little late today, I'm happy to fill anyone in. So contract types, you need to be aware when you go to become involved with federal contracting that there are a lot of different opportunities for contracting officers to make a decision to direct their own buy. In the end, when it all comes out in the wash, it is a contracting officer's name that is on any buy. So if it goes bad, it is always going to come back to them. So obviously contracting officers have a very much vested interest in making sure that they choose the best contract type for their specific procurement. And there are a couple of different types, and there are a couple of different things that influence which type the contracting officer is using. First and foremost, and this isn't entirely a type of contract, but this is more a question that a lot of people find themselves facing. It may be that even though you've been tracking to a certain extent, something like SAM, you've been watching the forecasts, you've been calling, you just consistently aren't seeing any opportunities for what you sell. I'm going to pick on shredding because it's a really easy one to illustrate. But if you offer document destruction services, unfortunately, there will probably never be a contract on the open market for you. And the reason that is any contracting officer, before they want to go out and advertise to buy something from a company like yours, has to first go through a number of mandatory sources. These sources basically exist because, as I mentioned about taxpayer dollars, I'm paid by taxpayer dollars, but also every contracting officer who's spending taxpayer dollars, has to make sure that we get the best value for the lowest cost. So particularly if we're going to buy something large, say a new aircraft, first of all, we have to look at our own agency's inventory. So if you're Department of Army and you need to buy a plane, you need to check that nobody else in the Army has a plane lying around that they're not using. And there's a big plane parking lot out in Arizona. If nobody in the Army has a plane, then you start checking all the other agencies' inventory. Does the Navy have a plane? Do the Marines have a plane? Does anybody else in the government have a plane that can meet your specs? If neither of them have a plane, then we have to go to federal prison industry. The government has a legitimate business interest in working with federal prison industries. First of all, because you don't have to pay prisoners, but you pay normal people. So there is a cost savings. Second of all, keeping prisoners busy is a rather important part of their penitentiary experience. So this also allows people, prisons to keep prisoners busy. Ability One and NIB-NISH. After you go through all those things, there is a possibility that your type of job is held aside for either NIB-NISH is the National Institute of the Blind and the National Institute of Severely Handicapped. People don't like to say NIB-NISH anymore, so those have really been consolidated under one program known as Ability One. Ability One allows us under the Javits-Wagner-O'Day Act to buy certain items from persons who are differently abled. This is the one where I mentioned shredding. If you are a shredding company, document destruction, anything like that, most shredding contracts in the federal government go to Ability One. So there may not be contracts hitting the street for your company because we already have to send that work somewhere. And if you're consistently saying that you have something that you believe the government must be buying, but you're just not seeing any of those buys out there, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll see about what might be going on. Finally, if you make it through all of those and nobody in the entire thing has what you want, then there's a possibility that you have to go to what are called our required sources. Required sources are the ones that you may have heard about in your work travels. The most famous required sources are the GSA schedules, either the GSA e-buy, which is sort of like really an Amazon.com for the federal government. It allows us to buy pre-negotiated items through a website. E-buy and Advantage actually kind of travel together. It has to do with the contract or the way that you buy things off the contract. But a lot of people have heard about GSA schedules or wondering if that's the right thing for them. Please feel free to give me a call when we have a little more time. I don't always think that GSA is the best route for everyone, but it might be for your business. And I know there are a lot of people out there that are willing to take your money for things like starting to work with GSA. Almost always, I can find you free help. So if you're interested in getting involved with something like GSA, please give me a call and we can help you start to make that movement at lower or no cost. Also be aware, I didn't know about this until a couple of days ago, but the Department of Veterans, there is a Veterans Administration, also has supply schedules. They have things like, I just noticed inoculations. They're looking for vaccines for monkeypox. But they have some stuff that they buy as well. So if you check out the VA website, you'll also find items that are these pre-negotiated things where I, as the government, can come in and just throw stuff in my cart. For you all as vendors, it's going to be a slightly different experience because one of the biggest problems with GSA for particularly small business participants who want to get involved is, first of all, whatever your lowest price offered commercially is, whether it's for bulk deals or pay in 30 or whatever your best price is, GSA demands that you go below that. So it can very much lower your profit margins depending on the type of product or service you sell. In addition, if you have something that is deeply affected by the market in some way and with great fluctuations in price, off the top of my head, anything with gold in it or anything in the petroleum market, it might not be the best thing for you since those prices have a tendency to fluctuate greatly. Also, if you sell supplies, you may find yourself in the GSA market in the position of bidding against the OEM, against the original equipment manufacturer for a job. So if you're looking at something like selling AEDs, automatic external defibrillators, you may be in the place where you're selling Philips Hard Start, but Philips is too. And you may be actually bidding at the same time as Philips. A lot of people get concerned that that automatically leaves them out of the possibility of bidding if they are reselling. Please understand that doesn't necessarily mean you can't. It just means that realize there may be things like overhead and it may be a very thin margin for you. The main idea for us is that these large pre-negotiated contract vehicles allow us as the government to secure volume pricing because we can go out in advance and say, hey, give us your best price. After you get through all those mandatory sources and required sources and everything, then you finally reach a point where contracting officers can actually start making determinations of their own about how to go about buying something. One of the most famous, I guess, federal contracting types is the IDIQ. That is the indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. What this basically means, and the reason that a contracting officer would choose to use this contract is the government knows we need an item, but we don't necessarily know how many we're going to want, and we don't know exactly when we want them. And again, because we have those mandatory sources that we spoke about a minute ago, the first thing that a contracting officer has to do is we have to see if there's already an IDIQ in place. And a lot of times it may be that if you're in the Department of Labor and need to buy something, that another agency may have already put in all the work and you may be able to piggyback on a contract that already exists. You don't want to spend the money to put a new contract into place and to administer it if somebody else is already doing the same thing. The main points of an IDIQ are the contract is for a fixed amount of time and there is going to be a fixed minimum. We as the government have to buy X amount and there will be a fixed maximum. We cannot go above a certain ceiling set by the original solicitation. Two examples of these IDIQs would be GWACs, which are government-wide acquisition contracts. One of the famous GWACs would be NASA SEWP, SEWP. That is a technological buy contract that is run by NASA, but it is available to all agencies. In addition, we have MAX, and MAX in this particular instance is multiple agency contracts. It may be, again, since we have these mandatory sources and this overall attempt not to have redundant products and services, multiple agencies may be able to use the contract as well. next type of contract that we're going to discuss is a requirements contract. There are two contracts that are kind of a seesaw of one another. A requirements contract says, as much as the government needs of X, we will sell you. So the government might not necessarily know how many widgets that we want to buy this year, but however many widgets we want to buy this year, the vendor is willing to sell us. And obviously, there is a higher risk here because we don't necessarily need a huge amount. And the requirements contract is really created for the convenience of the government, and you may end up putting a bid together and being awarded something, but we never really need that much, so you never get that many calls. The other side of that type of contracting is something called an output contract. Output contracts are pretty rare unless you're in kind of strange niche markets. But the basic idea of an output contract is however much you make, the government will buy. And this sometimes happens with very high-end, long lead time items. But in certain cases, it might be that you win a contract saying, start making these, and as many of these as you can create, we're going to buy. And that's a pretty awesome contract to have if you can find it. But like I said, the output contracts are pretty rare. Instead of doing a requirements contract or something like that, there is another major way that contracting officers can attempt to put through a contract to businesses. This is called a blanket purchase agreement. Blanket purchase agreements are only for quote unquote low value buys. You'll see it's listed, these are only used at or below the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently at $250,000. With a blanket purchase agreement, there is no minimum order. So again, you do have the slight risk that you could win this contract, but never actually see any profit from the contract, because it may turn out that we never make a call against the order. However, if you sell something that has a sort of repetitive tendency to it, off the top of my head, like you see at the bottom there, software licenses, where you know that every year you have to cough up cash for Adobe, or IT products, where you know once a year your mouse is going to die, and every X amount of time your phones are going to die, and everything else. These things that we know we're going to need over and over again, but we really can't possibly know in advance when. If computer breaks down, we don't see that in advance, and that's not necessarily something we can budget immediately. For places like the United States Army Corps of Engineers, they frequently need engineering or dredging services, but they don't know exactly when they're going to need it, but they kind of like to have someone on retainer so that the second those requirements come up, all the paperwork's already in order. As I said, these are good for repetitive needs. These are for open market items. What open market items mean are, these are not special order items. This is not for continual purchase of some crazy one-of-a-kind item that's just created for the government. These only work for items that anybody can buy, whether or not they're government, and it's frequently for what is called COTS. That is a commercial off-the-shelf item. I mentioned Adobe or something like that. That's a program that we in the government use, but the version I have of Adobe on my government computer is the same version that I have at home. So since there's no added change or added benefit to the government, that's called commercial off-the-shelf. Letter contract. You may realize, or you may recognize the graphic in the background. A few years ago, Philadelphia obviously experienced monumental and really once in a century flooding. The Vine Street Expressway was completely underwater. when you get these crazy Hurricane Sandy, this storm here, Katrina, the wildfires that frequently happen, unfortunately, out in California, or alternatively, if you have a humanitarian mission, occasionally we'll send Navy ships down to places like Haiti when there is an international incident like a fire or a volcano or something like that. When you have these very special one-off buys that are generally either connected to life, health, and property, someone's going to die, something's going to burn down, somebody is at immediate danger, or if you are in a humanitarian mission, you may use a letter contract. The point of a letter contract says, what I need to buy is so important that I'm willing to buy it and kind of go backward and fix the paperwork later. We had a case over in Iraq where there was actually shelling to the base. We needed, obviously, to get somebody immediately out there to fix that wall, to fix those fortifications. It's more important to get somebody fixing that wall than it is to go out and find 3 bidders, that it is to make sure that the best value paradigm was made, to make sure that all small businesses had a proper chance at the work. Sometimes we just need the work done and we'll fix everything else later. And if you have one of these crazy things like fixing a dam or fixing a wall that's been fired on, or attempting to get somebody else to clean up something like this Vine Street Expressway nightmare, that's usually a letter contract. The most important part of a letter contract from your side is, please realize, if you win one of these, a formal contract, we have to go back and finish up the paper within 180 days. If you are looking for more general information on your own time regarding different contract types, the Department of Defense has its own university that is for nothing other than contracting. That university is referred to as Defense Acquisition University, or DAU. DAU has amazing information available for everyone on the web. In this particular case, you see here the contracting cone. It allows you to enter different elements of a possible buy, and it will show you the type of buy that is recommended and why. You can sort of play your way down and through this, and it will give you additional information on all the contract types that we just discussed. The other side I mentioned that we were going to be talking about is contract payment. Obviously, it doesn't do any good to win all these government contracts if you don't actually get cash, and possibly more importantly, if you don't know when you're going to get cash. So what we're basically talking about in federal contracting is there is always a balance and a seesaw of risk. Where is the risk for this buy? If it goes wrong, is it going to be on the government and our problem, or is it going to be your problem as a vendor? And every single one of these contract types and these contract payment types work to switch the balance of power in that question between where the risk lies and where the benefits lie. All the way on the side of most advantageous for the federal government and conceivably least advantageous for vendors is the firm fixed price contract. A firm fixed price contract means that we make the contract award at a certain value. $75,000, 333. I have no idea why I chose that, but we will make the award at that price, and that is how much you are going to get paid. If something happens like COVID, where the supply chain collapses, or if something happens where for some reason the services are suddenly worth a lot more money that was not budgeted or something like that, I'm sorry, but that's your problem. The government says we are going to pay you X amount, and whatever problems you have are very unfortunate, but they're all on you because you're only getting that amount of money. Obviously, doing firm fixed price work very much relies on accurate cost estimating. That is something that we can give you some help with over here at the SBA so that you can really figure out what that sweet spot of price is. This is the most common contract type. Obviously, the government wants to use this as much as possible because if anything goes wrong, it's your fault, not ours. This, as we mentioned, is the highest vendor risk. You see this whole big thing that's so confusing, but really it comes down that this is great for me, but not quite so good for you. This can be used for any contract type and any contract value, but more frequently you see firm fixed price contracts for lower dollar value procurements, and they tend to lean more strongly towards supplies, not services. Next, cost plus incentive fee. Every time that we're looking to buy something in the federal government, we are required by law to consider price as one of the factors. However, price is not always the most important factor in anything, really. It's not even federal contracting. Sometimes, for one reason or another, you may desperately need the item as quickly as possible. Or it may be something that you're kind of willing to pay a little more and get a nicer one. Sometimes the things like quality, or in the cases of services, the performance may be worth a little more if it's better. In these cases where you're playing the old-fashioned game of if it's good and it's cheap, then it won't be fast. If it's fast and it's good, then it won't be cheap. You all have seen the Venn diagram of this here. The cost plus incentive fee allows us to pay the vendor both their contract costs and, in addition, a pre-negotiated fee that incentivizes something. So if we really need it quickly, we can give you a fee based on whether you got it to us faster, or we can base the fee that you receive, the incentive fee, on cost. If we really need you to bring this in at or below the negotiated rate, we can look at something like that. So this allows the contracting officer a bit of wiggle room, allowing them to make something very important, and usually that something is not price. Cost plus fixed fee. In a cost plus fixed fee contract, the vendor receives the costs that they outlay in performance of the contract, plus a fee that's automatically negotiated at the beginning of the contract. There is X number of dollars in this pot, and you win it or you don't win it. This is used generally when we are uncertain of the level of effort. This could be a mess and a hard job to try to complete. It might not, or in cases of research, development, technology, and evaluation. There is only so much here in the pot, and either you do well enough to get it or you don't. The least common contracting type, basically because the most risk here is on the government, not the vendor, is something called cost plus award fee. In a cost plus award fee contract, again, you do get your costs for the contract, allowable costs, plus an award fee. And the award fee in this category is actually based on contractor performance. So at the end of each quarter, you sit down with the vendor and discuss, okay, this is where you went really well. This is where you did very poorly. This is where you could see improvement. You kind of have a parent-teacher conference with the vendor and sit down and say, okay, here's where you did really well. Here's where you did very poorly. And they will get all or a portion of the fee that was discussed based on how well or how poorly they did. Downside of cost plus award fee for vendors, A, there is a fair amount of risk on your side. B, you don't know how much you're really going to be getting. But from a government contracting side, this motivates excellence. We really want to see the best of the best. These contracts are used very frequently in things like logistics support. Sometimes you have a giant contract that will create all the living requirements of a number of military bases or something like that. And you may ask the contractor, okay, you need to meet all of these requirements, but if you want the award fee, you have to go above and beyond in all these ways. I've used a number of terms as well today, and one of the parts of federal contracting that can be very annoying for people that are just becoming involved is A, we have a lot of what are called terms of art. We have a lot of weird phrases that mean something different in federal contracting than they mean everywhere else in the world. In addition, because we're the government, we love nothing more than an acronym. So a lot of times we'll throw out these acronyms and we don't remember anymore that normal humans don't know what they mean. So you may run into something like that. Or you may just want to go back and double check something I said or something that came out of what I said today. That same university that I discussed a few minutes ago, Defense Acquisition University, also runs the Aquapedia. And the Aquapedia is a wonderful dictionary style reference for contracting terms and types. So if you ever run into a word when you're wandering through and you don't want to ask someone, and I get it, I have social anxiety, I don't like asking people either. You can hit up DAU's encyclopedia 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and look something up. If you go to Wikipedia or to Aquapedia and whatever you find doesn't quite answer the question you had, again, I am now working for you as well, so you can reach out anytime and I will attempt to explain it further. Oh. Okay. Wow, that was exciting. I generally try to end all of my classes with a kind of polite warning. And if you've attended things like my certification classes and stuff like that, I generally warn people, and I will throw in an aside here. When you become involved in federal contracting, there are all sorts of people that suddenly want to be your best friend. Some of them are other companies who would like to do business with you either for good reasons or for bad. Some of them will be companies that would like you to pay them for the opportunity to do various parts of federal contracting, like register or get on some of these supply schedules. Please do not pay someone for outside services until you speak to either myself or one of our small business development centers and see if those services are available for free. There is a lot out in federal contracting that people will take your money for. I'm hearing up to $15,000 for help getting into the 8A program, $600 for help registering in SAM. People always have that handout. Welcome absolutely ready to take your money. But please always double check with one of us before you shell out money, because it may very well be a service or a product that we can help you find at low or no cost. In addition, if you get an email, a phone call, whatever type of communication that really seems off somehow, the font doesn't look right, the question doesn't look right, something about it is just bothering you, please also send those along to the SBA, because if no one tells us about creepy, horrible things that are going on, then we don't know about creepy, horrible things and we can't help them. So I can tell you off the top of my head, in the past year or so, I've had at least 3 fake bid letters come out where somebody will write to a number of small businesses posing as a representative of the National Park Service, and they'll ask people for pricing and they'll say, send it. And I'll look at it and I'm like, that doesn't look quite right. I'll call the person listed on the solicitation. They've never heard of it. It's a third party trying to get your pricing by posing it. And there's all sorts of weird phishing that happens because you become involved in the federal marketplace and because your information is out. In this case, I think the most important thing that you can know when you're starting to look at things like cost types and contract types, and as you start working in some of these contracts, the most important thing you can realize is, in terms of binding the government, for an example, say you win a contract to build UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, basically drones. And you get this contract and it's great, and you're on Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst and you have your little drones, and a general walks by and the general says, great drone, kid, paint it green. If you were in the armed forces, then when a general tells you to do something, you do it. If you are in the commercial world, if somebody that high up on the food chain tells you to do something, you do it. If Bill Gates walked by, you would paint the thing green. Federal contracting is a little different. The only person in the world that can change a contract is the contracting officer. And I mentioned at the very beginning, contracting officer kind of has their butt in the wind here, because anything that goes right or goes wrong comes back to their name because they're the ones signing it. So because they are on the hook for everything, they can make the final decision about everything. So if you have a federal contract and anybody, up to and including the President of the United States, says, hey, paint it green, hey, do it differently. If anybody tells you to alter the contract in any way, the correct answer is, I'm very sorry, blank. I'm very sorry, General. I'm very sorry, Mr. President. I'm very sorry, whomever it is. I can't make that change until I check in with the contracting officer. I have seen people do terrible things to themselves when they acted on the presumption that somebody who didn't have the right to tell them that the government changed their mind did it, and they followed it. So please be extremely careful about only listening to the right people. I had said at the end of the presentation that all my information would be available. I am available, and my second, Mr. George Tapia, are available at any time to answer your questions. Go Phils. But you can reach out to me with questions about contract types, contract pricing. If you have any questions about any of our set-aside programs, like 8A, woman-owned small business, historically underutilized business zone business, or veteran certification, you can reach out. In addition, if you have any questions about things like our lending programs, I'm happy to put you in touch with the folks on the lending side of our office. And that is what I have in terms of slides. I'm happy to answer any questions we have left in the short point. Otherwise, my LinkedIn is in the comments and you'll get a copy of the slides with all my info.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I've got, I did have one question in the chat. I answered it. It was about, are we going to share the recording from today? So I just want to reiterate this out loud. We are going to be sharing the recording as well as the slides. So we had some technical difficulties if you joined us late. So if you had difficulty getting in, it wasn't you, it was us. Our apologies. So we are going to share the recording. Before you, feel free to ask questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. If you have to run, I'm going to share a link to our survey. We'd love to know what you thought of today's webinar. If there are any other topics we can offer that would be of interest. So please take a minute or two and complete that if you have the time. It really helps us out. Any other questions from anybody? I know that was very informative. I'm particularly interested in the Aquapedia. I'm going to be clicking through that for a bit. That's a great resource. So you will get the deck with all the links as well as the recording, but this is a great chance to ask any questions while we have the whole group here. I am not seeing any coming through. Give it another little minute in case people are busy typing away into the chat. I have just a general question. Is there, you talked about this a little bit during the presentation, but is there kind of a, other than, I think people are probably familiar with GSA schedules, maybe, is there another kind of most popular contract type aside from GSA schedules that you see a lot of folks new to government contracting going to?
If you are new to government contracting, with almost probably 95% of the time, the first contracts that you run into are going to be firm fixed price. Generally speaking, new federal contractors do not have the experience or the past performance that would make a contracting officer feel entirely warm and fuzzy about doing the fee contracts, and particularly about doing cost contracts, because I had mentioned with most of the fee contracts, the first half was cost, which means the contractor gets paid all allowable costs on the contract. The government also tends to want to see some prior contracts so that we can see your pricing before we start relying on that sort of thing. So most likely you're going to see firm fixed price.
Gotcha. And I know we talked about past performance in previous calls. If we have a little minute, can you just reiterate for folks who maybe didn't join the previous sessions what we mean by past performance?
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Anytime that you want to go about bidding on a federal contract, this is generally our larger contracts, things like services, or things like if we wanted to buy a hospital, and occasionally we'll put out a contract for something like buying a hospital, buying a military base, buying a building, then we are going to want past performance, which is very similar to what you see in the commercial market. We want to know prior buys. In the federal government, you particularly want to look that the past performance that you are offering to the contracting officer is close in time, is close in value, and is close in scope. So if you're bidding on a project to build a veterans hospital in Boise or whatever, giving an example of your prior work for building a shed out back or whatever is not really useful, because even if you did the project well, it is by no means the same scope. It is a much smaller buy. try to generally line up things as closely as you can, giving these past clients to match up with your current client.
That's great advice. Thank you. We still have some folks on the call. Any other questions before we call it a day? All right. Going once, going twice. Oh, okay. I see some thank yous in the chat. So thank you for joining us today, everybody. Thank you, Jennifer, for leading this webinar. The link to the survey is in the chat. I hope everybody has a great rest of your afternoon, evening, and thanks again for joining us for our Pivoting to Procurement series.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.